Now, without further ado, I'm honored to introduce our keynote speaker, Avi Douglen. Avi is one of the world's top threat modeling experts and trainers, co-author of the Threat Modeling Manifesto, and has been with TMC since day one as a founding member. He is incredibly passionate about this hackathon, not just as a mentor and judge in past years, but as someone who truly believes in the power of hands-on learning. Today, he's here to share something special and something directly applicable to all of you as hackathon participants. His goal is to help you maximize this experience, make the most out of this event, and become a better threat modeler than you are today. So please join me in welcoming Avi Douglen.
Thank you so much, and thank you, Shuning. Can you let me share screen?
Absolutely.
Go.
Over to you, Avi.
All right. Here we go. I think Shuning went a little bit overboard on some of that, but thank you very much for that. It was very kind. So as you know, today is April 1st, and in keeping with the customary April Fool's Day, Shuning asked me to let everybody know that this is all just a massive prank. There's actually no hackathon actually happening. No, I'm just kidding. April Fool's, of course. But that is actually our theme today. And we're going to talk about being foolish, because there's a lot of foolishness going on in the world of threat modeling. Some of it is good, some of it is not. We often say there's no one right way to do threat modeling, but there are actually a lot of ways that are not the right way. So I want to talk a little bit about the foolishness that goes on in threat modeling and in secure design in general. So the first thing that I think everybody needs to know, as I'm sure you coming in here, you know that threat modeling is a very deeply technical activity. Just kidding, that's the second April Fool's joke of the day. It's not actually a technical activity. And I might be saying a few things that are a little bit controversial, but this is my theme for today. We're talking about the parts that are not just controversial. Sorry. With that being said, let's talk about that. I've already proven my authority by superior use of superior humor, but I'm actually not here as an authority. I'm here as the person who got lost in the forest slightly before you. So I'm going to point out a few of my mistakes. I do product security consulting at a small boutique called Bound Security, a very active in the TM Connect community and in OWASP and a few other communities as well. OWASP Israel, the Security Stack Exchange is a great resource. I'm also an accidental co-author of the Threat Modeling Manifesto. If you haven't read the Threat Modeling Manifesto yet, I suggest when all this is done, take 7 minutes, go to threatmodelingmanifesto.org and read through it twice. It doesn't take long, but it gives you a really good target of what we're talking about and where we're going. And as one of the co-authors, I am going to steal freely from the manifesto because I'm sure that there are a bunch of people here that haven't really heard about threat modeling before they signed up for the hackathon. So what is this big thing called threat modeling? Well, stealing from the manifesto. Here's a quick definition. Threat modeling is analyzing representations of a system to highlight concerns about security and privacy characteristics. The emphasis here is mine. This short little definition took about the 15 of us about 3.5 weeks to define because there's so many different meanings to threat modeling. Just real quick, I want to point out this security and privacy. We usually focus on the security, also cover other aspects such as privacy, and you're probably going to hear quite a bit about that later on. Highlight concerns. It doesn't mean list out all the possible vulnerabilities that you have in your system. It means focus on the things that you're concerned about, the things that you want to do something about. And we're talking about representations. We're not scanning live systems. It could be a model, a diagram, some form of abstraction, some higher level thinking about the system. So this is what threat modeling is. And I mean, there's a lot of great in-depth trainings, and you're going to have a short workshop after this with Robert Holba, one of the best trainers out there. Definitely worth joining, and you're going to hear a lot about how to do threat modeling. And it comes down to basically answering 4 questions. Adam Shostak put this together, and we adopted this for the manifesto as well. And basically, it comes down to answering What are we working on? What is the system? How do the components work? How do they interface with each other? How do the pieces work in depth? What can go wrong? These are the threats, the concerns, the pieces that you want to fix. What are we going to do about it? Arguably the most important part of threat modeling. We're here not just to write nice, big, fancy documents, but to make our systems more secure. And I'm taking a loose interpretation of the fourth question. Did we do a good enough job? Right? It's about getting the right fine tuning, about having the right effort involved. And Robert's going to go into a lot of depth about the mechanisms of how to do threat modeling, how to think about threat modeling. But for today, I want you to focus a little bit more on how to feel about threat modeling. So, story time. I'm going to tell you about the one time that I was actually a fool. Yeah, one time. So a while ago, I was actually invited to join in a potluck dinner. You know, everybody brings your own dish and everybody cooks and everybody brings, and you get this massive buffet of a lot of different things. You get to eat from a lot of dishes, and it's a lot of fun when you do it with friends. And they're absolutely fantastic. And I was going to show off. I made frijoles refritos, what Americans call refried beans. Really good, rich and creamy, savory with just a little bit of heat. Fantastic with any kind of burrito or any kind of fried chicken. It goes great with any meat dish. We're fantastic. So I showed up really proud of myself, as I tend to be. Um, and I found out what everybody else already knew, but I never bothered finding out. This was not a potluck dinner. This was potluck dessert. And as it turns out, spicy bean mash doesn't go really well with triple fudge brownies or cookies, and everybody else just brought these amazing sweets and pastries, and it doesn't really go that well with all these really sweet, rich things. Um, yeah, so I kind of screwed up on that. It also doesn't go well with trifle. Trifle is another really interesting dish. You have a lot of different layers, a lot of different components. They all need to actually work well together, integrate component. And what actually went wrong with this situation, right? Going to talk about what went wrong with threat modeling. Well, I never actually asked. I never found out what we're actually having. What's our purpose? Is it dinner? Is it dessert? What is everybody else cooking? And for that matter, I didn't even ask if there's any allergies, any other food constraints, any vegans in the crowd. Does it need to be kosher? Well, it was. But I never actually found out what our purpose is. Quick takeaways. Always ask, what are we doing here? What's our purpose? What are we trying to achieve? What else are we having? What else is going on? Are there any other constraints that we need to be thinking about? And what's our end goal? Story time. Let me tell you about the one time that I was actually a fool. A long time ago, I used to be a consultant. Well, I still am a consultant, but I used to get paid to show up to clients and threat model their systems for them. I still do that, but I do it very differently because this one time, a few years ago, I was working with a client who's developing a security product for organizations. I don't need to go into the details, but it was a really interesting product, and I made a really amazing threat model. I got into so much detail. I took 2 months to come back with a massive Excel sheet. I think there must have been 350 lines in that, and it was really impressive. A work of art, if I may say so myself. And the client, obviously was suitably impressed because I did so much research. I reverse engineered some of these protocols and the edge cases, things that you never even think about. But I got into that. I found all those things. And they did absolutely nothing with this absolutely impressive threat model. It was simply useless. It was too much. It was not aligned with them. So they were impressed. It was great. As they say, the surgery succeeded, but the patient died. It didn't really help. So what went wrong here? Well, this was a massive threat model, great details, but it was not aligned with what they actually needed. I ignored the context. I ignored the other stakeholders. I ignored the workflow. I didn't integrate with what is actually needed with what is actually going on. Talking about useless threat models, I like to misquote George Box, a known statistician, who didn't actually say all threat models are wrong. some are useful. Now here, the important part is to ignore the everything is wrong, but to focus on the useful part. If you can create a threat model that's actually useful, don't worry about being comprehensive and 100% correct. You never will be. It doesn't matter. What's important is that the output of this threat modeling exercise actually makes your product more secure, that you actually bring some value. Keep the value in mind when you are threat modeling, when you're trying to produce an output here. For those of you not familiar with this nice little diagram here, we love diagrams, right? This is actually a sketch of a World War II bomber. And the Allied effort, 25% of the Air Force was being shot down. So they wanted to put more armor on the planes, except you can't put armor on the whole plane. It'd be too heavy, too slow, too expensive. It'd be like flying a tank. That's not particularly useful. That's what they did. Like what any good engineer does is they start collecting data and they start marking down every plane that came back. They start marking down where the planes get shot, where they get exploded, bullet holes and flak and all that stuff. And this is really good, statistically significant markings of where the planes get shot. And just before they were about to layer on all that extra armor onto wherever these bullet holes are, I mean, that makes sense. You put the protection where you get shot. A statistician by the name of Abraham Vold showed up and pointed out that they were falling into one of history's greatest blunders. Never get into a land war in Asia. No, the other one. It's known as survivor's bias. They were only looking at the planes that came back. Instead of worrying about the ones that didn't make it, they were worried about getting shot. Nobody cares if you get shot. Nobody cares if you get scanned. What matters is if those are fatal. What you care about is all the places that the planes got shot and did not survive, did not make it back long enough to be patched up, refueled, and sent back out with the new staff. So this is a perfect mapping of the places where you don't need to put extra armor on because the plane will survive. It's important to always focus on what actually matters. What is the most important part that we have here? So quick takeaways. Align with your business need. What is the prerogative? What is the focus? What is the purpose that we're trying to drive here? What are we trying to achieve? What is the value that we're trying to protect or create? Always consider it in context. There are many layers of context that you might be worried about that you need to take into consideration, both on the business level, on the technical level, on the human level. And you always have to make the output of that threat model, make it actionable. If you produce a threat model, fantastic Excel sheet with 350 things without anything of saying, well, actually, go fix these 3 things right now. That's the most important thing. Always make it actionable. And always think about how your process will integrate with everybody else that is doing part of the system, right? Whether it's the developers, the architects, the people that are selling your product, they also need to be able to do this. The users, everybody needs to be involved in that. Now, I said at the very beginning that threat modeling wasn't just a technical exercise. And the threat modeling manifesto explicitly calls this out. A good threat modeling practice says it's a culture of finding and fixing design issues. More important than checkbox compliance, more important than the technical aspect. The most important part is the culture. Culture is always a social aspect. Ain't no such thing as a culture of computers. There's always a culture. Not getting into biological germs and warfare. They even go further. The manifesto even goes further and is very, very explicit. People and collaboration are much more important than the process, methodologies, and tools. Those are important too. How you do it, the mechanics is important. But the people and the collaboration, that is what makes it much better, more powerful. That is the important thing. Part of the manifesto group also created a set of capabilities and threat modeling capabilities model. And it's linked on the same site, /capabilities. You see the link down there. And there's a whole section around communication. Having different capabilities of good, powerful communication will make your threat modeling practice that much better, will take you to the next level. And things like positive reinforcement, focusing on people skills, constructive conversations. I remember this one time I was teaching threat modeling to a bunch of developers and architects, And the chief architect was in the room and was really upset. Why are we wasting our time? My architects, my the product managers, they do this already anyway. And then they start looking, the product managers and the other architects in the room start looking at each other. It's like, we never actually drew that kind of diagram. We never actually talked about this like that. We never actually, should we be doing that? Are you doing that? And they never actually sat down to talk about it and to communicate about it. So not only is communication an important part of threat modeling helps that communication. And at that point, of course, that chief architect turned around and his entire demeanor changed. And he's like, proceed, because he realized how powerful communicating about what the system actually does. Almost every time I go into an organization and start doing threat modeling with them, simply drawing a diagram of how the system actually works, the architect or the uh, product manager will define how the system works, and the developer in the back of the room is like, that's not how I built it, or that's not what that component does. Having that communication is incredibly important. Interestingly, outside the category of communication, the capabilities model in all the other categories also talks about things like communication, like integrating into your workflow, talking to people, active collaboration, fostering additional participation, focusing on the value-driven part of the system, aligning with other people, collaborating. All this stuff is super important to part of your threat modeling. Quick takeaways. Focus on the human side of the equation. It's not just a technical exercise. If you're sitting with your hoodie up in your basement, surfacing up a month and a half later, 2.5 months later with a massive Excel sheet, you're going to miss out on everything else. We're here for the human side of it. It is not just a technical scan of the system. It's understanding everybody else's perspective. And to do that, you need to be inclusive of everybody else, of the other stakeholders, of the people who are sitting quietly in the back of the room and don't want to participate. And you need to work together. This is a team sport. It's not if you do a threat model by yourself, you might come up with a bunch of good results, but it will never be as powerful as it is integrated with a full team, because it is about that shift in mindset of everybody understanding and seeing each other. And interestingly enough, and I discovered this way later than I'm proud to admit, empathy is like a cheat code to build trust with people. It's hard to get people to admit of how they built something different from what it was supposed to be, or not ideal, or not what is expected, without empathy. Empathy to everybody else. Developers going through a hard time. There's a lot of pressure. Architects are cutting corners. Everybody has their own constraints. And empathy to that will get them on the same page to build trust that we're doing this together as a team. And we're not coming in to tell you what you did wrong. We're here to build a better system together. Now, communication isn't just important for threat modeling. Threat modeling, as Brooke Schoenfeld once said, threat modeling is a form of communication itself. It helps you focus what you're going to be discussing, what you're going to be implementing, how you're going to be implementing it, why we agreed to something. And I don't know about you folks, I tend to be very senile, so remembering what I did, 3 weeks down the line or 6 months from now, I'm not going to remember what I decided. The threat model, the output of that, helps us understand why we decided to do a thing. Not to mention how useful this is to communicate with everybody else, other teams, your clients, partners, auditors, everybody else. So if the threat model is a form of communication, turns out that readability and usability of the output, of how you construct that, is actually super important. Again, that 350-line Excel sheet, that was not readable. That will take days just to parse out anything important. So please, when you put together a threat model, and I'm not just talking about the hackathon right now, I'm talking about in general, when you create a threat model, I don't even know how the scoring will be done. I'm sure Stephen will jump in soon to say how that scoring will be, but the readability, the parsability of that output is super important. There's a really cool quote by a really cool fellow that mentioned security at the expense of usability comes at the expense of security. Remember, if you are super 100% aiming for complete, you might not be quite as useful and usable as you might hope. Quick takeaways before I leave you with one last thought. Always be mindful of the user experience. In this case, the user of your threat model is who's ever receiving it, who's ever parsing it, who's ever reading it, right? When you write, you're not writing for a computer, you're not writing for yourself, you're writing for whoever is reading it. For the hackathon, that's the judges. Have mercy on them. They don't have to go through 5,000 data points just to get to the point of how good your actual threat model is. 50 times over, we said something like 50 teams was that? Keep that in mind. Output is important. The output of the threat model is static, but even more important is trying to understand the thought process that went into that, how you got to those conclusions, how you created that. And the big difference between a good threat model and a great one, much like with superheroes, supervillains, is presentation. There's a reason that Michelin star chefs work very hard at their plating, right? That spicy bean mush looks like a brown pile of that's not fancy. Nobody wants to eat that. On the other hand, having fancy crap isn't good either. So presentation to wrap well thought out results is important. I do want to leave you with one last thought real quick before I wrap up, is that I have mentioned, sorry, sorry. I want to leave you with one last thought. I mentioned being a fool, and sometimes that's a good thing. You can leverage this to great extent if you leave your humility outside. Sometimes you walk into the room and you can play the fool. The reason is this can be very useful. The reason we're here is to learn from each other. If you come in and you're the smartest person in the room, nobody's going to speak up and inform you that actually you're mistaken. We're there to learn from each other, to learn from each other's perspectives, to learn how everybody else sees the system, to be able to understand what that great big elephant in the room that we're talking about is, right? Asking questions will help you discover those cognitive biases that you don't even know about, having people ask you those questions. Open-ended questions are great when you don't know what you're looking for. But if you're looking for details, you might want to think about the Reddit syndrome. The Reddit syndrome, right? You show up on Reddit, ask for tech support, configuring my sound card for Linux, and nobody will give you, you'll get you'll get nothing, crickets for days. But if you drop a comment of, oh, Linux sucks, it doesn't support my sound card, you will get detailed, very detailed guidelines within moments of how to configure that. Because when people see a mistake, they want to correct it. So playing the fool is even if you are explicit and admit it up front, people are still feel forced to correct you and help you. And there's a really counterintuitive trick. Having a bad diagram, an ugly diagram, is actually super useful, because if you have a very polished, gorgeous diagram while you're trying to have a discussion with people, they're not going to come forward. They're just going to glaze over. Oh, it's so pretty. But if you show up with a really ugly diagram, people are going to be very critical about it and say, hey, you missed a whole bunch of stuff there. And they're going to show up. And that are the very ugliness invites challenge. Challenge leads to learning. And that is what we want. Quick takeaways, and then I'm going to wrap up. Always be learning. That's what we're here for. The only way to do that, check your ego at the door, question each other. You don't know the answers to it. That's why you're asking the questions. Challenge each other's assumptions. Find them. Find your own assumptions, challenge them, and that is how you learn. Because once you turn an assumption to be explicit, you've just defined your requirements, and that's a good thing. Be flexible in your thinking and in your techniques, whatever actually works. And my takeaway is really simple. Turns out we're all still fools. We're all still learning. We don't actually know. Every time you show up to a potluck dinner, make sure you ask. Make sure you find out what the constraints are. What are we trying to achieve? What are other people doing? Be considerate of them. If you ask the undereducated to provide their input, they're actually going to lead to a path of enlightenment and guiding themselves and each other to a better result. It's okay to be the greater fool as long as we keep learning. This entire industry was built by greater fools. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Abby. That is so good. Thank you so
I'm
much.
gonna leave the all the takeaways up on screen for 1 second if y'all want that.